we go. In my day job, I am a volunteer consumer lawyer for Connecticut Legal Services, and I want to thank you very much for joining this webinar. We have the exciting additions to this webinar of closed captioning, thanks to Clara, and if you want to enable that, you just go to the bottom and look for that icon where it says CC over on the right. We also have a simultaneous ASL interpretation, thanks to Fidel. So thanks to Clara and Fidel for making this a fully accessible broadcast for us all. I am now, one more piece of housekeeping. We're going to have a presentation by our panelists, and we're going to get to them in a second. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom, type in your question, and we'll try to get it to as many questions as we can at the end. If we don't get to your questions, we'll try to answer you via email. So with that, I'm going to ask our legal team of Dan, Alana, and Grace to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Dan Barrett. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the legal director here at the ACLU of Connecticut. I have been here since May of 2015.
Hi, I'm Alana Bildner. I'm the staff attorney here, she, her, hers, and I've been here for about 3 years.
Hi, I'm Grace Sinnott. I'm a senior paralegal and project specialist. My pronouns are she, hers, and I have been here since January of 2016.
Thank you, panelists and legal department. I'm going to get us rolling by asking you to explain to our audience, how do you decide what cases to litigate? I mean, you're very good, but you're a very small department, and obviously we can't do everything. How do you decide what cases do we do?
You're right, Ben. You're looking at the legal department. So we're missing a couple of dogs and cute babies, but this is it. So you've got 2 good lawyers and a Hall of Fame paralegal, and that means that we have to be very, very targeted in the cases that we take on. We are able to kind of extend the brain power that you see in Alana and Grace with private law firms that volunteer to help us, but the core of the operation is right here in the Brady Bunch boxes that you're looking at. So what it means is that we have to pick cases in which we think we're going to make an impact, in which we have a chance of winning, or a good chance of winning, and which we're going to have, ended up with assistance to a lot of people, not just one. So we're trying to make what lawyers call precedent or case law. We're trying to change the law, just as our colleagues do over in the State House. We're trying to change the way the Connecticut law protects people. And we're also trying to change federal law. And we're going to do that through the courts. In our system, the court is the other side of what the legislature does. So we're looking for bang for the buck, cases in which we can really make an impact and that aren't going to take up all of our time to the exclusion of everything else we do. Necessarily, that comes with some bad news, which is that we have to turn away virtually every case that comes to us for assistance because there are 3 of us. So we are carefully picking cases in which we're going to have that impact. And that means that a lot of the cases that come to us for assistance, we just can't take up, which we hate, but that's the nature of our size. So in the cases that we're going to tell you about today, these are examples of instances of which we're applying our legal department to try to move the law in a way that's going to help everyone in Connecticut.
Alana, would you want to add anything to that before we get to your actual cases?
Oh, thanks, Ben. Just that, we're always grateful for the collaboration that allows us to, as Dan said, to kind of extend our firepower far beyond the 3 of us. So we've really been fortunate in having great partners in regional firms and national, multinational firms, and also in law school clinics and just other kind of lawyers who've jumped on the wagon and helped out. So in a small state like Connecticut, it's a small bar, and we've made a lot of friends that have really helped us do what we need to do and do it even more expansively.
Great. So with that said, what example do you want to share with us, or examples do you want to share with us about this high impact litigation? And also you might want to mention whether it just came to us or whether we had to develop it a little bit to get to the point of launching the case, because I think that's an interesting distinction. So I'll just open it up for any of you to take over.
Well, I think Ilana's going to tell us about a case that she's leading up that involves a woman named Veronica May Clarke.
Sure. So this case is Clarke v. Quiros. Our client actually, in response to your question, our client filed this case pro se back in 2019. We were aware of it and joined a little bit more recently. This case challenges the Department of Correction, the Connecticut Department of Corrections' failure to provide medical treatment to our client, who is a woman, a transgender woman with gender dysphoria, for the past 6 years. As this case has gone on, we have learned about the multiple failings, unfortunately, of the department and their total disinterest in treating our client for a very serious medical condition and providing her with what she needs. She's not alone in this experience. There are other transgender people whom we've met in the Department of Correction who have similarly been refused appropriate medical care. And there are many, many other people who are not transgender. So this case is a small kind of subset of the medical care that's lacking in our Department of Correction, which is a much wider issue, but it focuses pretty specifically on one group of people and one person. We're hopefully coming closer and closer to a decision by the judge in this case.
Thanks, Ilana. And have you had a trial when you say you come to a decision? Is it on motions? Have you had a trial? How is that position?
Yeah, so I mentioned our client was litigating this case all by herself, very impressively for quite a while. We jumped on board along with a wonderful firm, Finn Dixon and Hurling. In the spring of 2021, we went through discovery, and now we are kind of gearing up for motions for what's called summary judgment. So asking the judge to decide things, hopefully, because they're so obvious that there's no other possible decision that could be made.
And could you
favor.
And could you just tell us what are the constitutional rights that we think the Department of Correction are violating of our client, please?
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, when it comes to people who are in prison, one of the big ones is the Eighth Amendment, which bars cruel and unusual punishment, basically any kind of cruel treatment, but that goes into, among other things, medical care and mental health care. Unfortunately, the Eighth Amendment can be a tough hill to climb, a tough battle, because we, as a society, we don't care nearly enough about what happens once people are locked away behind bars. And I think our Eighth Amendment case law reflects that. But it's a battle that it's really important to fight. So our client, as mentioned, started it by herself. We jumped on board, and we believe that the medical care that she's received, such as it is, violates the Eighth Amendment of our Constitution, no question.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Dan, I think we're over to you for your case, maybe next.
I'd love to tell you about a case called Massimino versus Benoit, which you might be tempted to call Benoit, but it's apparently pronounced Benoit. And this is a case in which we are once again litigating people's ability to observe the police and at the outer edges, document and perhaps protest the police. This is a case in which the plaintiff, Keith Massimino, was arrested by two employees of the Waterbury Police Department for video recording the exterior of the Waterbury Police Department building itself. If you've ever been to Waterbury, if there's anybody from Waterbury, you'll know that the Waterbury Police Department occupies an entire city block. It's surrounded by 4 streets. They all have sidewalks. You can see it. There's no bushes or fences. And Keith went and recorded the outside of the building and was a couple of minutes into his recording confronted by these two employees who demanded to know what he was doing, et cetera, et cetera. Keith knows a little bit about his rights, which he's a great exemplar for the rest of us. And he knew that he wasn't doing anything wrong. And therefore, he knew that he did not have to answer any questions, that he was free to go about his business. So he politely declined to answer any questions about what he was doing. And the police, in turn, arrested him for declining to identify himself. So the case poses 2 interesting questions. The first is the First Amendment right to memorialize with some kind of device, a sketch pad, a painting, a voice memo on your phone, that which you can see with your eyes. I don't know that anyone would argue that Keith was breaking the law by simply walking around the building and looking at it with his eyes. But as we've learned in the past 10 years, it's incredibly important when interacting with the police or the government generally to memorialize what went on. And so Keith's case poses that First Amendment question of whether the memorialization is protected. You won't be surprised to learn that we think the answer is not only yes, but that has been obvious for years. The more subsidiary question is the tactic that I referred to earlier, which was the police arresting him, not for the recording, but for declining to identify himself. And you have seen that tactic kind of on the rise since the George Floyd protests, in which the police have learned that it's against the law to punish people for recording what's going on a public street. So they've switched tactics and they've decided to either confiscate recording devices or make demands for identification and then arrest somebody when they decline lawfully. So in this case, there's the First Amendment question of whether one can record, and there's also a Fourth Amendment question of whether one can be arrested and prosecuted for doing what they're allowed to do under the law, which is decline to identify themselves. So it's a pretty exciting case, and we're hoping that it's going to further enhance people's ability to document what the government is doing, to observe what the government is doing, and then in some cases protest, or to use the resulting footage, for example, to press for change or to expose what the government is doing.
Thanks, Dan. That was a great description. So now, with those examples in mind, you've sort of segued us nicely to the third member of our team, Grace Sinnott, who is going to tell us about a very exciting, fairly recent culmination of years of really hard work by everybody, but most especially Grace, to enable us to see what the government's doing. So Grace, take it away.
Thanks, Ben. I'm just going to share my screen, and if you could just confirm that you are seeing what I think you're seeing.
I see Project Flashlight.
Project Flashlight. Okay, great. So Project Flashlight is a website that we've created with the intention of centralizing, summarizing, and maintaining police information for everybody to see. The information on this website ranges from the powers that town and state governments have chosen to give police departments I'm blanking, to give to police, and the ways in which police have harmed people across Connecticut. So it's important to note that data will not fix our state system, a system in which police are very capable and able to hurt and kill people. But it's a start, because knowing how police departments work can arm the public with basic facts and context to counter police misinformation. So in a very much larger sense, Project Flashlight, knowledge is power. So Project Flashlight consists of 4 sections, 2 of which are currently live and 2 of which are still to come. So the first 2 sections that are live are contracts and police commissions, and the 2 coming down the pipe are use of force and suits and settlements. So let's start and let's take a quick look at contracts. Just wait till that loads. So Connecticut has 102 police departments that are unionized. The towns and cities marked blue on this map have municipal police departments, and the towns and cities marked gray on this map don't have municipal police departments, but instead rely on the Connecticut State Police. So each of these police departments has a union contract. These contracts, they govern a range of topics from wages and hours to healthcare and disciplinary procedures. We've analyzed these contracts with the intention of understanding who has disciplinary authority over the department, and for 5 key contract terms, which I will explain in a second. But so as an example, let's just check out Woodbridge. So you can access Woodbridge through the drop-down menu or by clicking on the town on the map. So on the right, you'll see when Woodbridge's contract expires, you'll see who the disciplinary authority of the Woodbridge Police Department is In this case, it's the Board of Police Commissioners. You can download Woodbridge's contract if you please. And if you scroll down, you can see our 5 key contract terms, which is data that we've tried to standardize within these contracts, how the current contract or how Woodbridge's contract aligns with our best practice. And you can also mouse over the small I to the left of the contract term to access a definition that explains these contract terms. I know it's a little bit confusing, but for time's sake, let's just focus on one of these. So let's take a look at, does discipline remain on the record? So this term is begging the question, does misconduct remain on a police employee's record, or is it automatically erased after a certain time or based on certain conditions? So as you can see, Woodbridge's contract does not align very well with our recommendations for best practices. So what this means is that somewhere in Woodbridge's contract, there is language that, that deems that police misconduct, complaints that have been filed against an officer, discipline that has historically been on an officer's record, if they behave for a few years, if they have a clean record for a few years, that information very well may be wiped from the record and not accessible. And we don't recommend that. So let's take a look at police commissions. So it's important to note that not every town has a board of police commissioners. The towns marked red on the map are towns that have exercised their statutory right to create a police commission. So for those that do have police commissions, they can exercise broad powers over the police department. And these include powers of discipline, which is very important. So if you're interested to see if your town has a police commission, you can click on the town. But in this case, let's just take a look at someone we know does. Let's look at Brookfield. So you can see on the right, Brookfield's police commission is made up of 8 members. They're serving 4-year terms, and they're appointed by the city council or select board. In other towns and cities, police commissions can be elected, or they can be nominated by somebody like your mayor or your first selectman, and then appointed by the city council. So the process of selection does vary, but a common question is who sits on a police commission? So this is kind of the fun part, but oftentimes commissioners are current police officers from other towns. They're retired police officers from the same town. They're retired police chiefs from the same town and other towns. So it's important to know who sits on a town's commission, because oftentimes the Board of Police Commissioners is the disciplinary authority. So if you remember back to when we were looking at Woodbridge's contract, the discipline authority is the Board of Police Commissioners. So police are overseeing police in a lot of cases, and that can lead to a realm of problems. So based on the selection process, it's also important to note that if police commissioners are electable, then it's a really great way to get involved at a local level in your town to try to start implementing some oversight. And yeah, that's a very brief overview of police commissions, but we have some stuff coming down the pipe. We like to say that the future of Flashlight is bright. And so in the coming years, we're going to be adding 2 additional sections of data. This is use of force and suits and settlements. So nothing lives in these sections on the website right now, but you can check it out. There's a longer explanation, but what we hope to do with use of force is centralize and publish data where police employees use physical force that is likely to cause serious physical injury, so that people can understand where, when, how police use force, and including whom they use it against. And so with suits and settlements, we plan to collect statewide information about lawsuits and settlements against police. This information is not easy to find. It's very difficult to find, but this section of Flashlight will show the times that police are sued, the reasons behind it, what happens or what has happened with the lawsuit. And the goal of this is to create a database over time of this information. So I know that was a lot of information crammed into a very short segment, but We do have some how-to videos on our social media with more information about how to use the website, what the intent is. But if you have any questions about how to use it and what we're doing, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to, answer any questions or provide that information. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think we're good.
Thank you very much, Grace. That was a great introduction to Project Flashlight. And I would urge everybody watching the webinar to go to our website, find the Project Flashlight link and click around. It's an amazing tool. And it illustrates very well what Dan and Alana were also talking about, which is the multiplier effect that we need when we're such a small in terms of individual staff members, because not only does it enable each and every one of you and each and one of our thousands of members in Connecticut to get interested in finding out, could they become a reformist police commissioner board member, but this Project Flashlight is one of the very first ever, if not the first, in the nation to collect this kind of information. And other ACLU affiliates and other states are interested in it. And of course, Grace and Alana and Dan say, yes, please take our hard earned fruits of our labor and multiply it out to other jurisdictions so we can get many flashlights all over the nation. So thanks, Grace. It's a very exciting milestone for our legal department. And then another multiplier I wanted to just mention briefly is the legal department's going to be hiring a legal fellow, a 2-year position, who will start in the fall, I believe. And we don't have the ability to hire a full, staff person permanently, but we are going to at least have a fellow. And if you want to talk just a little bit about that, Alana or Dan.
Sure. So we are really excited to have somebody added to our lineup here. And we've got a great lawyer coming in for 2 years, going to be starting in late August. And it's going to allow, having another person on is going to allow us not only to have a set of fresh eyes, but also to move, let's say, a case that we would normally not be able to move because there's only so many hours in the day. Most of our work is kind of like a physics problem. There really are just only so many hours in a week, and therefore we're limited in what cases. So we're very, very excited both to have a fresh perspective and also to have somebody who can add a little capacity and muscle, which means we could file a brief that we might not have been able to, or we could take on a client that we would otherwise pass on. So very, very exciting for us starting in late August, early September.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions. First one is going to be directed to, I think, to Alana's case with the transgender client. And the question is, what do we hope to do with the law in this case? Are we going to create new state law, new federal constitutional law, new state constitutional law, all of the above? What do you, Alana, tell us.
So as I mentioned, this case, Clarke v. Kuras, is about provision of healthcare for serious medical conditions. Our client is a woman living with gender dysphoria in prison. And so the Eighth Amendment is the operative law here. The Eighth Amendment guarantees that people in prison must be provided medical care by prison.
And that's of the federal constitution.
That's the federal constitution. However, and we talked about this earlier, about looking for cases that set precedent and kind of create a ripple effect of helpful law. Our appellate court, which is the Second Circuit, has not yet directly looked at the issue of the provision of medical care to people who are transgender with gender dysphoria in prison. Other circuits have, other courts have, but our circuit hasn't. So if this case does make it to the circuit level, we would hope to create positive case law that reinforces the fact that the federal constitution demands medical care for people in prison, including people who are transgender and many, many others.
Thank you. So it's hoping to create new federal law, but federal law that will govern what goes on in Connecticut prisons as well as in other parts of the Second Circuit covers.
Right.
Here's
Connecticut,
New York,
Vermont,
Connecticut, Vermont. Yeah.
So a lot of people in prison in those states. So it would hopefully, again, we would hope it would have a very helpful and powerful effect in cementing people's rights under the federal constitution.
Okay, here's a question maybe for you, Dan. An audience member wants to know, if they are questioned and tested for sobriety and given a traffic warning by the state police, what are their rights in terms of getting a copy of a police report that might have been created as a result of that stop? And does a police report have to get created?
So it almost certainly was created. I guess the really short answer is yes, you can get a copy. It's going to take a while. If the stop results in a criminal charge, you will be provided with a copy of that as part of what's called discovery in the criminal court. So information about the case. If nothing came of the stop, then you probably have to use Connecticut's Open Records Act, which we call the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, to obtain the information. Bad news. FOIA is procedurally useless. It takes years to get documents. Good news, you can get the document. It just takes years. It's a real deficiency in our law. We're the only state in the nation in which we cannot go to court to enforce our Open Records Act. As a result, the state police in particular are a noted serial violator of the law. They typically take up to 2 years to respond to open records requests. So that's your bad and your good. I'm not narrating that as if I'm happy with it. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. Ultimately, yes, though, you can get a copy.
Okay, so if you've been holding back, asking a question, type away into Q&A because we do have a couple of minutes left. While you're typing away, I wanted to let you know that if you think of a question after this is done, you can send an email to info@acluct.org. And also there'll be a copy of the recording of today's conversation that'll be soon available on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And it's a really great way to stay in touch we have a Facebook page, and this being the 21st century, we have an Instagram account, and we are on Twitter. And of course, there's the good old website, ACLU-CT.org. Okay, we do have one more question. And here's the question. There's a gap in Connecticut's laws on voyeurism. The current law is based on electronic surveillance, but it does not allow voyeurs to be prosecuted when they act in person. Do you have any comment on that? I have no knowledge of this area of the law. I'm sorry, but
I don't either. Not practicing criminal law. I am aware of the electronic voyeurism provisions, but I don't know anything about in-person voyeurism. I regret.
Okay.
There are a few more questions, Ben, about different things on the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going down. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Here's a great question. Who manages the state police? Is there a state police commission? Since the state police are the local police for so many of our municipalities, that's a very important thing to know.
It's Ned Lamont and somebody that he hires. At the moment, it's Ravella, right? James Ravella. I don't think I'm talking out of school by saying functionally nobody, because the state police are very, very well insulated. But there's no, unless Grace corrects me, there's no similar thing in which a person can get appointed to a board that has oversight of the state police. In some sense, the legislature is your outlet for state police oversight, and I think it's pretty important. My sense is that people don't often talk with their legislators outside of a crisis. So unless something's going on, they tend not to call. But if you call your legislator, or you approach them at a community event and just say, hey, I think there ought to be more oversight, or here's my concern. That's kind of a big deal for a legislator because they typically don't get contact from constituents. So that may be one thing you can think of.
Thanks, Dan. This is for you, Grace. Project Flashlight, collecting the information. What, isn't it just publicly available? Why did it take you years? Why are we so excited?
So this is all public information. So you would think that it's publicly available and very easy to find. It is not. So a lot of what we do is through public records request, which is related to what Dan was referring to before, which is FOIA, so the Freedom of Information Commission. And it is not easy. They don't make it easy to get information. So we literally have to send public records requests. Luckily, when the world went virtual a couple of years ago, those stopped being paper form, or the majority of them stopped being paper form, I should say. But A lot of this is going through town clerk's office, police departments, corporation counsel, and just asking for the information. And a lot of times on their end, on the town's end, on the department's end, their information isn't centralized. So they're researching the information, trying to centralize it to send it to us. So it's really not easy. And there's not much for us to do if they don't comply, but appeal to the FOIC. And as Dan said, that process takes years.
The FOIC is the Freedom of Information Commission. If you ask for publicly available information and you get stonewalled, there is a remedy, but it takes years. So it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to keep going and a lot of time. So that's why it took a while. Okay, here's a good question. If I'm asked to identify myself by a police officer, what's the harm in identifying myself? Is there some downside to that?
Well, if you don't want to identify yourself, you're free not to. If you feel like identifying yourself, go for it. I would caution you, however, that modern policing is largely predicated on a person's past experience with the police. And so if you've ever been arrested, regardless of what happened to that arrest, if you've ever been prosecuted, that mere record is going to be treated by the police as most, if not all, evidence that you are currently, right now, up to no good. So it is not necessarily in anyone's particular interest to speak with the police. Also, it depends a little bit on where you are and who you are. It is significantly more dangerous, stratospherically more dangerous, for certain among our friends and neighbors here in Connecticut to speak with the police, even so much as to discuss what their name is. It's a different situation for a middle-aged lawyer like me who's white. That's a different interaction. The other thing that I think a criminal defense lawyer would tell you is that speaking with the police, even if it's on something that you think is limited to what your name is, rarely turns out the way you hope it will. And so the police, for example, are very, very good at turning a conversation about one thing into something else. So I would exercise extreme caution and exercise, if you feel comfortable doing it, your right to say, I don't want to talk to you. Sorry.
Okay. Here's a question following up again on Grace's work. This is someone from Oxford, a town that does not have a police commission. The police chief is also the first selectman, or the first selectman is also the police chief, who answers to the voters, but only every 2 years. Would you recommend, Grace, that this concerned citizen be pushing for an independent commission of either appointed or elected folks in Oxford to be a police commission?
The short answer is yes, definitely. But just actually looking at Flashlight myself, so it doesn't look like Oxford has a municipal police department. So Oxford technically falls under the realm of Connecticut State Police. So I don't know, Dan or Alana may be better suited to answer the chief first selectman aspect of that question. But yes, there should always be independent oversight.
Yeah, I can answer that. I live in a little town called Morris. We have no police. The first selectman is our chief law enforcement official, but that means he would decide to call the state police if there were an issue.
Yeah, the answer that I don't know is whether. So I think that Oxford could still form a police commission, and my guess is that its purview would be limited to the existing services that they contract for by the state police, which is not useless. I mean, they have the ability to shape how policing is done in their town, regardless of who's doing it.
Okay, and I think we have time for another couple of questions. The question is again to Grace. Police commissioners in the towns that do have them, you said they were often current or former police officers, and they often have 4-year terms. Are the terms renewable? Is it unusual for this group to be largely male? I could make a good guess, but I'm going to let the person with the knowledge answer that. Go ahead, Grace.
I'm going to say yes. Yes, male, white, and cop.
So it's not unusual, and the terms are renewable, right?
Yes.
Generally, yeah, okay. Can one of you, maybe Alana or Dan, talk about what work the ACLU of Connecticut is doing specifically with Hartford Police Department accountability? If there's anything specific to Hartford as opposed to just all over the state.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything specific to Hartford. There's nothing that we're litigating with Hartford right now. Now, it may be that the other half or third of our operation, our public policy department, has something in the works with respect to Hartford, but we're not litigating anything with Hartford right now.
Okay, by the way,
Heaven
that
knows
person,
we could spend the rest of our careers doing that. We just
right, but that person also gave a shout out to the work you all are doing on prosecutor accountability. Okay, and the final question before we say goodbye, that we couldn't get to all the questions. Thank you so much. We will get to them after we're offline here, but the one I want to leave you all with is question asked, is there a way to do volunteer work for the ACLU?
So there is, depending, we have many kind of sides of the operation. As I said, there's a thing called Public Policy and Advocacy Department, aka PPAD. There's litigation. Your volunteer opportunities in litigation, which is the department that we work in, are a little more limited if you're a layperson. This is kind of the work of lawyers and paralegals, and so there are some volunteer opportunities if you're a lawyer and you want to move cases. You want to work on cases with us. It could be the case that we could use your help, depending on your training, your capacity, that kind of thing. For lay people in litigation, it's a little tougher, but there are other sides of the organization. So it may be that the info inbox the info email address that you gave out earlier, Ben, is the way to go.
Okay, so again, as we sign off, it's info@aclu-ct.org. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, and there's aclu-ct.org. I want to thank again Clara and Fidel for their help in putting this together. And I especially want to thank Grace and Alana and Dan for opening the curtain and letting you have a little insider's peek at the workings of the legal department of ACLU of Connecticut. Thank you for all your support out there. And as you can see, your support